Okay, well, good afternoon or good evening, everybody, wherever you happen to be on the planet. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we're here with another of our virtual events. And today we're talking to Elly Griffiths again. And here is her brand new book, the 13th in the Galloway series, The Nighthawks. And beautiful cover. Yeah, they did such a nice job with these covers. But let's see, I'm going to be monitoring the Facebook comments. So if you have questions for Elly or Barbara, go ahead and put them in the comments field, and I'll reemerge towards the end of the program, and I'll be happy to ask any of the questions that you might have. So Barbara, I'll turn it over to you for right now.
Thank you very much. I don't have a copy to hold up because they're all at the bookstore and my British copy is long gone. There it is. Elly has one too. Is it the same cover, the American and the British, Elly?
No, I'll show you the British one actually. I'll put them up together. They're both lovely.
Oh, there we go. I knew it was quite dramatically different. Yeah, it looks, is that a slightly embossed type on the British cover?
Yeah.
We were talking to, I'm trying to remember who it was the other day, and it was Claire McIntosh, and she pointed out, that the type on her British cover was that erased or slightly embossed, and therefore stands out more brilliantly than the flat type. So I wondered if they had done that for you as well. It's gorgeous.
Well, it's when I used to work in publishing, you always used to get excited if there was an embossed cover because, you know, it meant one more time through the 4-color press and it counts as a 5-color. So I always get excited about it for that reason.
Well, of course you do with your publishing background. You also know that they don't waste that kind of money on authors.
Well, that is true. But I do feel I'm very lucky to have got such brilliant, different, but really brilliant covers. So I'm very pleased with them.
Well, I am too. And this is Lucky 13 in the Ruth Galloway series, which I have loved from the very beginning and read in real time as Elly has written them. An advantage to having been in business for so long is that we have had that opportunity to discover not at book 13, but rather at book 1, and then read our way forward. So you've been remarkably what's the word I want here? You've hit your target because you've written one a year, haven't you, since the very first?
Yes, I have. And I just want to say thank you so much for supporting the books from the very beginning, which you have done actually, right from book 1. So thank you so much, Barbara. Yes, I have. I've been doing, well, actually, the last few years, I've been doing 2 a year. So I've done a Ruth book and one of the Brighton mysteries, or a Ruth book and a standalone. So I think it's for about the last 4 years, maybe 5 years, I've done 2 a year. So yeah, I have, touch wood, always hit my targets.
Yes, you have. Now it's been remarkable, and such a treat for those of us who love your books. Are even though you're writing 3 series and they have different voices and different characters and different landscapes and the whole bit, you're so stylish and you are so witty in a kind way. I mean, you can be snarky, but you're never cruel.
Thank you.
You're not, Ruth Rendell could really just drill right down to the bone, just like, I think one of the reasons I love your books so much is that they always make me feel good about people, despite the terrible things that happen in them, because after all, they are murder mysteries. But nonetheless, I always come away feeling, kind of transported and elevated. And I think Ruth is such a wonderfully complicated character. And in her last book, in book 12, I hope I have this right, because they kind of run together in my mind, she had broken away from her North Sea existence, the North Norfolk, and from
Nelson,
in the police force from Nelson, and actually moved to Cambridge and taken up an academic post there, and was living with an American whom you introduced, I think, a book or 2 before to give Nelson a run for his money. So obviously we're back in Norfolk now and the Nighthawks, and Nelson's back on the scene. Did you have a sort of feeling you wanted to break her away and then it just didn't work, or did you always just plan it to be a digression?
I think you got it quite right there. First of all, thank you so much for those lovely things you said, that the sense of being transported was just such a lovely thing to say. Thank you. Yes, you're quite right. So I had thought, so book 12 as the Lantern Men does start with her. She's moved away, as you say. She's living with Frank. And I did invent Frank as, of course I did. I always feel a little bit nervous about saying I invented him, but I did invent him. Yep. And I did invent him as a sort of foil for Nelson. And I wanted him to be, you know, a really good, nice character. He's meant to be very good looking. He looks like George Clooney. But somehow Ruth and me couldn't quite break away from Nelson. And somehow in that book, in the Nighthawks, I think it's only about chapter 2, suddenly there's the dark shape of Nelson appearing, kind of with a job that lures Ruth back to Norfolk, really. And so, yes, you're quite right. The Nighthawks were right back in Norfolk. Starts off with a group of metal detectorists who sometimes in Britain, I don't know, in the US, are called Nighthawks. And actually, it's a term for the slightly less scrupulous metal detectorists, people who sort of descend on an archaeological site and take things. And this group are a little bit sinister because they usually go out at night. So it starts off with them on the North Norfolk coast there, and they find a body. They find some Bronze Age treasure first, and then they find a body. So Nelson is called in to look at the body, Ruth is called in to look at the treasure, and that's where it starts. And it's funny, really, because this book, as we were saying, book 13, lucky 13, it is a lucky number in Italy, actually, St. Anthony's number. We're right back in Norfolk, and I think partly because it was written in lockdown, so I couldn't go to Norfolk, but somehow it's the most Norfolk of all my books. It's got so much Norfolk legend and myth and geography and history in it. I think it just must have been full of missing Norfolk.
Well, that's a really interesting point. Yeah, I can quite see it. Of course, Norfolk is a great place for an archaeologist. I mean, you know, when you've got fen country, when you've got, you know, bogs and all kinds of things, you've got an absolutely ace place for an archaeologist. And there's a skeleton that that shows up in the book. We may start with the metal detectorists and, you know, and treasure, and then a current body, because Nelson would hardly be called up to the scene if it were, you know, Bronze Age
body, yes.
Yeah, but then we have a skeleton. And, you know, I was thinking, Elly, because there really is a very good dramatization of Sutton Hoo, you know, finding the treasure of Sutton Hoo with the archaeologist. And that's a great Bronze Age treasure. And I've been to visit it, you know, at the, I'm trying to think, where is it? Is it the British Museum, right?
I think it's at the British Museum now.
Yeah, the British Museum. I get it confused. It's the library part of the British Museum that moved, but the British Museum itself stayed put. And I've been to see the Sutton Hoo treasure, and of course, it's really fabulous. And I've been to Norway, where there are some remarkable Viking ships. There's a whole museum, in fact, west of Oslo, that if you're a tourist, there's like a bus loop tour that you go on and you arrive at, and there are, maybe it's like 5 long ships, something like that, and bits of treasure and so forth. I mean, just amazing stuff to see. But when I saw the Sutton Hoo treasure, of course, I flashed to Ruth in North Norfolk, you know, because I thought, okay, this is the kind of stuff that that you would find in a place like that. So she's not really likely to be digging up hoards in Cambridge. I mean, how like, you know, in the university.
Although Cambridge is on the fens too.
Well, so it is.
And there's a remarkable Bronze Age village actually found not far from, but you're quite right. And the thing that always amazes me is that only 9,000 years ago, you could tell I'm married to an archaeologist because that seems like yesterday, but only 9,000 years ago, Britain was attached to Scandinavia, was attached to Europe, only 9,000 years ago. And there is that, as you say, that fenland and that really shallow sea between Norfolk and mainland Europe. And it's full of treasure. Yeah, it's full of bodies. And you're absolutely right, Isabel, about bogland, you know, that does preserve, you know, preserve flesh. And so you find those amazing bog bodies. And I was in Denmark a couple of years ago at Horsens, you know, that wonderful, they have a wonderful crime book fair there in an old prison. And also went to a nearby museum, and they've got these amazing Jutland bodies there. So yeah, I'm not going to run out of bodies in Norfolk, I don't think. think?
No. I was actually thinking it was at the university itself because there's so much architecture there. I mean, maybe you could spade down into the backs, running along the River Cam and find something someday, but how likely is it that, you're really going to do that? So, Ruth, and she misses her cottage. She misses, the seaside part. And then, there's this whole thing with Nelson, and, Nelson himself is, suffers from ambiguity. I mean, he's been married forever. And then there was the whole thing about his wife's last child, which I won't go into for people who haven't read the books yet, but that was a tense moment. At one point, they're actually in Italy, because you do one trip there. But so Nelson hasn't ever fully committed to Ruth or to staying in his marriage, even though you have cruelly kept us going back and forth. And I suppose maybe it'll always be a dual thing, but Ruth is the same problem. I mean, Frank was wonderful. If she was ever going to leave Nelson and leave him behind, surely Frank would be like the right person. And yet here she is in book 13 back there. And, one of the cliffhangers that always comes up in these books is when it ends, you're never entirely sure where Ruth and Nelson are going to be. And Elly does it to us again. Although I've seen some excitement, people trying to read things into how the Nighthawks ends, but I'm not going to go there because I don't trust you. It's just something I just don't, not going to. So let's talk about The Detectorist, because it's actually quite a fun program on British television called The Detectorist, when there they are with their, sweeps and the whole bit. Have you watched it?
Yeah, I have. It's a wonderful program. Toby Jones and Mackenzie Crook. Yeah, it's a really lovely, gentle, fun program, isn't it? Yeah, I love it. And I also have watched the film you were mentioning, that The Dig, that's come out recently about the Sutton Hoo treasure. And that I love that too, and those beautiful big skies, and I thought it was really wonderful. So hopefully people might be getting a bit more interested in seeing archaeology on the TV or on the big screen.
Oh, I think so. And I thought that the Sutton Hoo, I mean, one of the things you took away from the film was how it took a tremendous level of commitment to see that whole project through on behalf of the archaeologists and on behalf of the landowner. And, I loved it that she, the owner of the estate, it turns out she didn't marry it, it was hers. She's from that family and she inherited it. So there was a certain amount she had, in the common parlance, she had agency. And in the end, she was able to decide to donate it and didn't have to ask anybody's permission. But the commitment of the archaeologist was also had to be intense, because I mean, it isn't like, you just spaded the whole thing up in one happy afternoon. It took a lot of muscle, a lot of money, a lot of commitment to actually find the treasure and bring it up.
Yes, and it is fascinating, isn't it? Really fascinating watching archaeologists work, and they take such a long time, and I suppose in some ways it's a bit like police work, isn't it? Sometimes that takes a really long time. And I think at the very beginning of this series of the Crossing Places, that was what's one of the things that really attracted me to archaeology, as my husband's an archaeologist, although he was a lawyer when we met. And he retrained to be an archaeologist. So that was one of the things that attracted me to the idea of writing about an archaeologist, was how similar it is to police work, and also kind of how different. And that's what you get in Ruth and Nelson. And you're quite right about there being the will they, won't they aspect of Ruth and Nelson. Obviously, I can't say any more about that. But there is a bit of a cliffhanger at the end of the Nighthawks, an emotional cliffhanger, I guess, for anyone who hasn't read it. And all I can say is that I'm writing book 14 now, and it's called The Locked Room, and it's set in 2020. So it's set during lockdown, during the pandemic. And of course, everything changes in the pandemic. So.
Maybe you were waiting for a kind of Deus ex machina, moment to decide where to go. I don't, it's an interesting question about how long you can keep up a dance in a series, a really long series, before the reader's patience and possibly your own patience kind of run out and you say, let's get on with it. Let's either go here or go there. I don't really know what that point is. I mean, Janet Ivanovich has had that going on now for 26 books.
Yeah.
Is it going to be, I'm trying to remember. And then she brought in yet a third party.
Yes, because it was the policeman and then the ex-hood. Is it Mancini? I can't remember that. But yes, she has. And also there are some great long-running crime series like, the Rebus books by Ian Rankin.
Yeah.
And I thought the last one, which came out last year, was it Song for Dark Times? I mean, for me, that was one of the best ones. And it's book 25 or something. I can't remember where he is. So there are some series that do keep going up. I don't think I will be able to keep going for that long with a will they won't they thing, but I feel I've got a little bit more there's a little bit more in the story and in Ruth and Nelson's story. And but it's so true about the Deus Ex Machina thing of in fact, why can't books end with the gods coming down from heaven and sorting everything out? I'm going to bring that back for crime novels. Have Athena turn up and say, actually, Nelson, you should do this, Ruth should do that. What's wrong with that? But the lockdown and I really wondered whether to write about it, but because, as you said earlier on, I have written a book every year for the last 14 years, it felt wrong to miss out 2020, so I thought I'm going to have to do it. But of course it does throw everything into relief, so it's actually really interesting to write about.
Well, it really is. And there's a lot, no matter how you do it. Even if they committed to each other rather than to split up and do their separate thing, there's a huge amount of fallout and conflict and so forth. Yes. That would inevitably, given the checkered past that they both now have, so you wouldn't really run out of conflict at all. It would just be a sort of a different kind. So I'm all excited now about.
Oh, good. And there's the wider range. That's the other really good thing, and thinking as well about the Reeves books and how invested I feel now in Siobhan and other characters like that, is that you can build up the rest of the cast. Yes. And now, there's all that too. There's how's Cathbed going to cope with lockdown? Very well, of course. And Judy and Clough and all the other characters. So I have to admit that is the other positive thing about writing a long-running series is, the cast gets bigger and it gets more complicated. And that's lovely, really.
Well, it really is, although you killed off one of its best characters, so I haven't quite ever gotten over that, but I understand. I understand why it happened, but nonetheless, a great character. One of the reasons you love A Song for the Dark Times is that we're up in Upper Scotland, where there's also a bog. And Ian and I, when we did his launch, because I was fortunate enough to do that and discuss it with him, one of the things that has been turned up is the fact that as these territories thaw in Arctic places, northern Scotland and so forth, they're releasing a lot of things into the atmosphere that are complicating the whole bit with climate change. So I thought of you, in fact, when I read that, because it has this boggy section. She's always
yes, I did love that, I have to say.
Aaron Hart wrote a couple of books set in Ireland about an archaeologist, and they find a bog man, and they haven't been in. It was a long time ago. I'm not sure whether they're actually in print or whether you just read them digitally. But did you read her two books?
I have, and she's a lovely writer. Actually, I can't remember. I've definitely read a couple of hers, and one of those set in Ireland. Yes, it is. I think it's just something so fascinating about finding this person almost unchanged, sometimes with their hair and with their their jewelry, and some of the Jutland bodies had these rather cool little leather miniskirts on. It's just kind of just finding them there. But the other thing as well about just thinking about Rebus and Edinburgh and cities as well. You remember when they found Richard III in Leicester? Few years ago now in England, they found the body of King Richard III in a car park in Leicester. Yep. And it just seemed extraordinary. His body was found under the R of car park. But when I was talking to an archaeologist about that, he said, do you know that's what inner city car parks often are? It's where we know there's something buried, but we can't afford to dig it up. So we just tarmac it over, and it's a car park. And it really made me look differently. You know, when you're in a big old city like York or London or Edinburgh, and you see those odd little car parks that are between two buildings, you think, oh, why didn't they build on that? And it's because they know there's something there. So that made me look at cities very differently.
Wow, that is so much fun. Now, I have been to York where they found the Viking, the Viking
Jorvik,
settlement.
yes.
And that was because, I think if I remember right, that's because the gas company was excavating and stumbled across, what is it? I'm trying to remember, Jorvik or whatever it's called.
Jorvik, yes.
Yeah, and I remember it's so, I mean, I haven't been there now for at least 20 years, but at that point, it was almost like a little Disney ride. You got into a little tram and they didn't want you walking around in this ancient Viking settlement. But what they did, which I thought was really wonderful, is they didn't sanitize it. And so there were very distinctive and often unpleasant smells connected with your tram ride through Jorvik. And they took you past the midden and, and the latrines and so forth. And you got to see very different, like, for example, Ephesus, which is all lovely marble and perfectly clean. And there's a 20-seat latrine, and you can, the public restroom, and, it had seats all arranged around. It was very sanitary. They had flowing water. They had, marble. And also, the contrast between that and the latrines in Jorvik were dramatic. but I love the fact that they gave you an opportunity without prettifying it to go through it. And you had to stay inside the little tram in order to visit it. But again, it was a public, a works project that turned up the village. And I suspect that will happen time on time again, that they'll spade in there for something like.
I hadn't realized that it was gasworks.
I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I think it was gasworks. And, they went, I mean, York, of course, just sits on, crossroads. I mean, it's got Viking and it's got Roman and it's got medieval and so forth. So, York would be a really rich area for archaeological finds. And
it's got Betty's tea rooms like Harrogate. What could be better? But Andy and I are watching at the moment, don't know if you've seen it, The Last Kingdom, which is based on the Bernard Cornwell books. Yep. And they've just got to York. And I just love it. I love those books as well. And they're the sort of books that make you just smell somewhere. But in fact, in Ruth 14, they find a body in Tombland in Norfolk, which is that area in the middle of Norfolk, around the cathedral. And rather disappointingly, I think Tombland comes from a Danish word meaning empty space. You want it to be a bit spookier than that. But when they were I think they were doing lots of one-way systems in Norwich. I think they were doing the one-way system. They just find all these bodies. And that's the thing about old cities, isn't it? Just a little bit of civic work. And you find a few dead Vikings.
No, it's absolutely true. I mean, you can go back, if you want to go to Isserlik and, look into the, Schliemann and Troy and so forth. He had to dig down through, like 7 different cities or something before he got to one that he at least thought was Troy. I'm not entirely clear. I mean, there's this, modern horse erected nearby, which is, a touristy thing and all. And I don't know that they're ever really going to, definitively prove that it was Troy. But the thing is that there were layers of, stuff. And I just read my new Smithsonian about the find at Saqqara, which I have been to. And in fact, when I was there a year ago, December, with my friend, the author Dana Stabenow, she was doing some research. We bravely, and finally I did it, we bravely climbed up into one of the pyramids in Saqqara and then descended into the actual tomb chamber, which I have to say, going down was really terrifying. Going up wasn't all that bad, but
what was that like?
Well,
wow.
Nobody's thinking about public health and safety, let me tell you, or disabilities or anything of the sort. And I have a knee replacement, so my balance is not always great. And there was this lovely little old man who was probably younger than I am, but didn't look it, who was like the guardian of the tomb. So Dana and I, there's this huge, long, rickety wooden ladder thing. I mean, multiple layers like a fire escape. So you start at the desert level and you climb up to it, because the entrance, to these tombs was not at ground level, obviously, it was somewhere into the pyramids. I mean, somewhere up high. So we climb all the way up, and then inevitably we're going to have to slide all the way down. So it's a little tiny staircase with a rickety railing, but the problem is there's no good braking system because the treads are, so Dana goes first, and I follow her down, and we actually make it to the bottom, both of us amazed that we haven't like broken anything. And when you're inside it, the shape inside the pyramid of the tomb, the burial chamber reflects the shape of the entire pyramid. And that was great. And neither one of us wanted to do the Great Pyramid at Giza because it's a mob scene, and we felt that would be so claustrophobic. This is before COVID. Well, it was actually just pre-COVID. That was too terrifying to do it in a press of enormous numbers of people. But we're the only two people in this pyramid in Saqqara. And then going out was okay, because you could climb up and you felt like you had better. I mean, that's true of all climbing. Going up is always better than descending. When we got to the top, there's a little bench, and we sat down and we kind of breathed and whatever. And then I realized that the most terrifying part of this entire thing was going to be descending the enormous rickety wooden, structure that we climbed up in order to get to the damn entrance in the first place. And Dana kind of looks at me because there's no railing. So I'm going to have to step down on my somewhat rocky knee. And this lovely little old man perceived the problem, and he stood up and he got in front of me, and I put my hand on his shoulder. So he was like a moving, walking stick, cane, whatever. And he went down, and I went right behind him. And so I was able to navigate it to the bottom without actually breaking anything, which was so kind of him. I know. It was great. But I have to say that was my only really archaeological moment, in 80 years, 79 then, it was the only time I felt as though, I were kind of like a tomb explorer, Indiana Jones, or, whatever. And so I really admire people who are brave enough, to descend into caverns or, do the kinds of things that archaeologists often end up doing. Agatha Christie married her second husband was an archaeologist, Max Nolan. You can go visit his stuff in Berlin and in the British Museum. And I think she famously said something about, I don't remember why, about how satisfying it was to be married to an archaeologist, because as you got older, you only got more interesting.
Yeah, they get more interested in you as you get older. Yeah, I often think about that. Yes, it's and it's one. I love the archaeological themes that are in her books, and of course she does go out to Egypt, but somewhere I've never been and would love to go to. But and I think there are some sites. I think there was one in Africa recently where they found remains of something in these little caves, and the entrance is so small that they're actually looking for women archaeologists to go in there because they tend to be sort of smaller. And I'm only 5'2", so I'd be perfect, but I wouldn't go.
Well, there you are.
I wouldn't go if you paid me, but it's a really, archaeology is kind of endlessly fascinating, I think. And I sort of feel that whatever else I run out of, I'm not going to run out of archaeology, and I'm not going to run out of those sort of folklore elements. Because I was saying earlier on, the Nighthawk, it's got this legend in it of a sort of spectral black dog who's called Black Shuck in Norfolk, who appears to people, and some people say he's the devil, or he appears to people just before they're about to die. Is there a similar North American legend? Do you know? Is there a similar?
Oh, I don't know. There's probably the odd wolf, I would imagine. Yes. I think there's also something starts with a W, whatever it is. Patrick, do you remember in Minnesota? It's an Indian word. Winnebago. I don't want to say Winnebago. That's the name. That's all I. A Caribbean thing. Well, it's something along those lines. Patrick will let us know.
I was doing an event with the lovely British writer Rowan Coleman. I don't know if you know her stuff, and she writes a really good series as Bella Ellis. and it's about the Brontes solving crimes. It's really
Yes.
good. You'd love it, I think.
I do.
But she
I know
was,
them.
the Diabolical Bones is the most
Yep.
recent one. Anyhow, Rowan Bella was reminding me that the Black Shark appears in Jane Eyre. You know, the beginning where Jane Eyre sees Rochester gallopy on his horse with his dog Pilot. She thinks it's the Gytrash, which is the northern name for this black dog that appears. So I think the legend is everywhere.
It is. Patrick lets me know I was close with Winnebago. It's actually Wendigo.
Wonderful. I'm going to write that down.
Right. It's it comes up where I've come into it is in Minnesota, and which is, a border state in the United States. Minnesota borders with Canada, and there's the boundary waters, and there's a lot of rather porous territory between the US and Canada up there, but Native American lands. And the Navajo have a tremendous belief system that involves creatures like that. And, if you were to read The Blessing Way by Tony Hillerman, it's based in part on that kind of thing. And if they die in their own Hogan, I'm trying to remember, there's a whole thing about how they have to open all the doors and windows and remove the body and all, so that there won't be.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think you're right. I think, across history, there's also always been a, malicious or creatures, dangerous creatures or so forth. Many of them we can't quite see. There's a wonderful new book by Mike Ripley, who's been writing Marjorie Allingham in a more modern form. And the new one, Mr. Campion's Coven, has in fact dogs. And there's a big black dog in it. I haven't read all of them, but I have to say that I think Mr. Campion's Coven, I recommend it to you unreserved.
Oh, I will look that up.
It's absolutely brilliant. You'll like it a lot. It takes place in a little tiny village on the coast of Essex. So it's not that dissimilar from what you're doing. And there is a little settlement, and then there's, this spectral dog and things going on. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And, it's interesting, Elly, that you can read, several books by an author in a series or something, and, and they just kind of go along. And then all of a sudden there could be this one book that just like blows you up, and you think, wow. And yes. That's the one, and I think it's his ninth. Maybe that's what I was thinking. Yours might be the ninth earlier. I think it's the eighth or ninth that he's written in continuing Mr. Campion, although Mr. Campion is now a senior. So he has, and that's the great thing about, about Ruth and Nelson. I mean, you're not aging them in real time, but, you could bring in a new generation. I mean, in theory, you could keep it going as long as you find it interesting.
Yes, I suppose that's true. And I do, there are obviously some great series. I don't think Jack Reacher ages, does he? I don't think he does. So there are some great series where people don't age, but there is something very satisfying about a series where people do age in real time.
Right. Well, that's
like Rebus, and I love him sort of walking along with his little dog, and his health issues, and Ian Rankin hasn't sort of shied away from any of that, and I really like that, because it makes it so real, doesn't it? And it means that you have this sort of continuing theme, really, of time passing. And so I guess I could even have a pause and then come back when Kate, Ruth's daughter, is a teenager. I don't know. Yes.
Well, you could, but I don't want you to do that. But anyway, while we're talking, you've written two wonderful standalones. You won an Edgar for the first one, which is America's, highest. It's like the Oscar for best film, for best book, the Edgar Allan Poe Award. And then the last time we talked was about the new one. So Harbinger Kaur is a really interesting character. Tell us a little bit about what inspired these two standalones, and are you going to write a third?
Oh, thank you. Yes, so the last time we chatted, it was about the Postscript Murders, wasn't it? So the first one is The Stranger Diaries, and I'd been thinking for a while, so I think I was probably on about book Ruth sort of 10 or something, but I had been thinking for a long time that I wanted to do something different. And I guess that's the thing, isn't it? And sometimes people say to you, oh, are you scared you're going to run out of ideas? And I always think, oh, well, now I am. But usually it's not that. Usually it's that you've got other ideas, but you don't have time enough to write them. So I'd always wanted to do something Gothic. You know, I know that we share this, Barbara. We both love Victorian literature. And I did my master's in Victorian literature. I'm a particular fan of Wilkie Collins. So I always want to do something a bit Gothic, but I didn't want to write a historical novel, though I love historical novels. And I wasn't sure how to do it. And then I teach creative writing. In fact, I teach creative writing at Cambridge and also at a place called Westdean in Sussex. And it's a lovely old house. I don't know, have you ever been to Westdean?
I have not. I've been in Sussex a lot, but I haven't. And I know that there are a lot of crime writers who do go to Westdean.
Yeah, there are. Leslie Thompson teaches there. It's when you're in Brighton next, you and I will go to Westdean because it's a beautiful stately home, but it was also owned by this guy Edward James, who was very involved in the Surrealist movement. So it's also full of surreal art. It's a very strange place. And I was there one day and I noticed that there was a staircase, like a spiral staircase, and I was told that it went up to Edward James's study. And that he'd had a carpet put in which was imprinted the footprint of his dead wife. And I thought, ooh, maybe I could use that in a book. And then I realized that I could set the Strange Diaries eventually it was in a school that was a modern school, a comprehensive school, which is our equivalent of a public school. So you don't, in the American sense, and that you don't have to pay to go there. So it was a comprehensive school, but it had once been a stately home, and it had once been owned by a man, a made-up writer, who was famous for a short story called The Stranger. So that's where that story starts, and it starts when a murder happens of a teacher in a school that is made to look a bit like the murder in this short story, The Stranger. So, you know, that was how I managed to sort of get those two things working together. And then at a certain point, in comes the detective. And it's the Harbinder Kaur, who is a 35-year-old British Indian woman from a Sikh family. She's gay. She's a detective. She says in one of the books that she's the best gay detective in Sussex. Oh, I'm the only gay Sikh detective in Sussex. And she really did sort of come from nowhere. And she was meant to be sort of slightly snarky, slightly acerbic detective character. But then when I started to write the Postscript Murders, which starts with the death of an elderly woman in a sheltered accommodation in Sussex, and that the caregiver starts to have some suspicions, and she goes to the police. Lo and behold, it's Harbinder Kaur again. So I hadn't meant the two books to be linked, but they were by her. And I just really have liked writing about her. Thank you for the nice things you've said about her, because she's very, you know, as I say, she's quite sarcastic. She's a little bit judgmental. So she's not perfect, but she's great fun to write. And I think she will have to come into a third book. So having meant to do these as standalones, I think there will be another book, possibly with an entirely different cast of characters, but that has Harbinder in it. And because I feel as well in Harbinder's own private life, there's a few things that need to happen. So I would quite like to write about that.
See what happens, you create these characters and then you get so interested in them, you have to plumb their lives. And they're wonderful cast that she has in the Postscript Murders. And, you know, I'd be sad to lose them, but I can see that it would be interesting to have her have some other people come into play. And of course you live there. You don't live in Norfolk, you live near Brighton in Sussex. So it's fun to write about that.
It is. It's a really fun place to live. I know Norfolk quite well because my grandmother lived there and my aunt. And I used to spend holidays there as a child. I think there's also something about places you visited as a child, isn't there, that stays in your head. And I think also they seem very big and mysterious, those sort of places. And maybe that's why Norfolk seems so mysterious to me. But Brighton is also a real, you know, it's a real godsend for a writer. And in November in the US is the next of the Brighton mysteries, and it's called The Midnight Hour. And it's set in a village just outside Brighton, which is actually really near where I live. So I live in a place called Saltdean, and the next village along is called Rottingdean. And in it is this place that was once a hotel that the Hollywood stars used to stay in, called Tudor Court. and it's now private homes. So this starts with a death at Tudor Court, and there actually was once a board game called Murder at Tudor Court. So that's the next Brighton mystery.
I remember Rottingdean. Is there a school there?
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's
I
a
remember
school there.
there's a gorgeous school there. I can still see it very clearly, but I did visit Rottingdean, and part of it was to admire that particular architecture.
Well, it is really beautiful, and Kipling lived there as well. And so it might be Rodine you're thinking of, just next to Rottingdean, the famous girls' school. But there was a boys' prep school in Rottingdean, which is now shut down, and they're actually turning into flats at the moment.
I said, well, I remember visiting Kipling. This was my first driving by myself trip in England, and I was still nervous about both the manual shift and the left side of the road. And I remember approaching Kipling's home with some trepidation and great relief when I finally got to the car park,
Oh, well done.
Yes, there was. And part of my strategy, which I developed, was that I learned that when the pubs open at 6, much of the traffic on the roads disappeared, especially the lorries, the trucks, and so forth. And so if you go to visit National Trust and other properties, whether it's stately homes or something of the sort, they always have tea rooms because they're a profit center. But the tea rooms are generally open till 6 o'clock. And so I would time my visit, I'd have a decent breakfast somewhere, and then I would save up, and around 4:30, I would venture to the tea room, where I unfairly discovered that you could have endless refills of tea at no charge, but coffee was going to be like, £1 a cup, whatever. So I learned to drink tea. But anyway, so I would.
That's such a good system, Barbara. I'm going to go with that, because I don't much like traffic either. So that's really true. Stay in the tea room until the pub's open.
That's right. So I would do that. And then because, as you advance towards summer, I think I started this saga in April, and I ended it in July. And my mistake was I didn't actually buy a car. I rented a car, which was totally stupid because it cost a fortune. But anyway, so then I would plot, where am I going from here? Usually I had, I had booked a destination or something. And if you're traveling by yourself in England, and this was in like 1986, you still wasn't all that comfortable to be a single woman in a dining room. You tended to get strange looks. So what I learned was I could progress from the tea room. I could then transition down the roads with very little traffic, and I didn't have to panic about the driving and the whole thing. I would arrive at my destination, and I would go to the bar, and I would have port, and I would have cheese and biscuits. And, and it was just perfect. I mean, I was many more carbohydrates than I was actually used to, but that's okay. That's England. And, and it was just great. And that became my kind of strategy for.
You ought to write about this trip, and these is fantastic, I think.
It was. I have been in every English cathedral. I have been in almost every English, and I'm talking about from Land's End to John O'Groats. I mean, I did the entire thing, and it was really interesting, to Cornwall is a lot different than Sussex, and as you get up further north. And it was one reason I love British television, the detective shows in particular, because it's really a fun way to go back and, and revisit all that. I did a summer at Oxford. I did a whole summer at Worcester College after that trip. And I had to enroll as a Stanford student, Stanford undergraduate. I actually had to enroll at the University of California, Berkeley, the arch rival of Stanford, in order to attend Worcester College, because it was a kind of a share program where you could go for the summer. And I still, to my great irritation, have 3 hours of graduate credit at Berkeley. But I loved Oxford, and it was wonderful to actually just attend it. I like Cambridge a lot, and I spent time there, but I didn't actually, live there, which is a very different experience. But one of the things I loved the most was the Bodleian Library, which had this appalling way of recovering books. Their acquisitions worked on the date of accession. So if you tried to find anything in the Bodleian, you had to work out when they acquired it, which, given the history of the Bodleian, went on forever. And so they'd have little slips and little shovels with paste, and they would, do all this stuff. So what you learned if you were a student at Oxford is if you really wanted a book, You got it from Cambridge. So they have a better library system, and you could request it, and you could get it faster from Cambridge than you could dig it out of the bowels of the Bodleian. So
I love the Pitt Rivers Museum is wonderful in Oxford as well. Really strange, odd the way it's all laid out, and they've got lots of sort of human remains there as well. So really interesting.
They do, and the Ashmolean is wonderful.
Yeah.
Anyway, you could send Ruth, I suppose, on a visit to Oxford, just to be really fair.
I could do. Yeah, she's been to Cambridge. Yes, maybe I should. I often think of places that she would love, and I often go to places and think, wow, Ruth would love this, because where there's interesting archaeology, and my daughter's at university at Exeter, but that's in Cornwall,
Right.
and that, as you say, is a really interesting place with a real different culture. So yeah, maybe I just need to have a whole new series.
Well, I don't know. I mean, if Ruth, let's finish this up by saying that, well, Ruth, she is an archaeologist, but she's become a forensic archaeologist. And, there's the coroner position as, part of the policing thing, but police departments can attach a forensic archaeologist. So you could actually get her an invitation from like York or Exeter or Oxford to come and
You're quite right.
And think how it would piss off Nelson, if
Yes.
she's over there.
He would be very cross. Yes, that's a really good idea. Thank you, Barbara. Because she does get to, as you said, she gets to go to Italy to advise on some bones. So why not somewhere else yeah.
Oh, good. I'm glad. See, that's the really great thing about these conversations is that I can occasionally nudge a series of directions.
I've got my notes
I would
here.
like it to go, even though I'm not the author. Anyway, Elly, it's always an absolute joy to talk to you. Let me wind up by asking you, you've taken on a very interesting role for the Crime Writers Association, which is the British version of the Mystery Writers Association in America, which is different, the Crime Writers Association, from the Detection Club. You have to make a distinction. But for the crime writers, what is it you've agreed to do?
Yeah, well, I'm very honoured because I have been made the Crime Writers Association's bookshop champion, which sounds very grand. And Mick Heron, who's a good friend, a brilliant writer, sent me a little text saying, will you get a cape? And I would love to have a cape. It feels like I should have a cape. But the idea is that just to strengthen the link between crime writers and bookshops, because I think one of the things that lockdown has taught us all, hasn't it, is how much to value our bookshops. Because I think we've all turned to books and reading. I know I certainly have. And we've started to value the fact that you have these bookshops where you can go in and they're this amazing curated selection of books, and there are people there who know all about books who will help us to find just the perfect title for us. So it's those one, and also they're just lovely places. Usually we talk about tea rooms, quite often there are lovely places to have tea and buy things, and so they're just lovely places. And I think lockdown has certainly taught us to appreciate them more. So the idea is to send writers out into bookshops to strengthen those links, to maybe do events, to celebrate crime writing, because lockdown has made a lot of people turn to reading, but rather strangely it has made quite a lot of people turn to reading crime novels. So and I'm sure you've found the same with your beautiful bookshop. I think people really have started to, if they didn't before, I think it has made us value bookshops. So that's what it's about. It's about strengthening that link.
Oh, that's wonderful. So you can have your book selected by a real person rather than an algorithm, which is not,
exactly.
Not a bad idea.
We've all had that. Just while I've been talking to you, I've jotted down some book titles, because it's that lovely thing of someone saying, do you know what? I think you'd really like that book. I was reading and I thought you'd like it. And when someone says that, you always do like it, don't you? Because they know.
I think that's absolutely true. Well, let's call up the real bookseller at the Poison Pen, called Patrick, the heart of the book.
There he is.
Here you are, Patrick. Do you agree that, way better to be a real person recommending than algorithms?
I hope so. Or I'm out of a job.
No, you're not. We're actually reinventing ourselves in a number of interesting directions. But
yeah,
Patrick is probably the most thoughtful reader, one of them anyway, on our staff. So
we all like different things, which is great.
We do, absolutely do. Yep. I got a recommendation from John Charles, who did a book chat with an author yesterday morning and loved the book. So I now have to come down to the store and pick it up because he got a copy from the publisher. You know, I mean, we find our
And
way
that's
to
the
books
great thing,
sometimes.
isn't it? However many books you've read, it's always so exciting when someone says, there's a lovely bookshop, Dulwich Books in London, and last time I was in there, the bookseller's called Hazel, and she said, you'd love this book, and it's called Standard Deviation. I'm sorry, I can't remember who wrote it. And it was so, I thought I'd never pick that up myself, but I absolutely loved it. And as soon as she saw me, she said, oh, do you know what? I think you'd really like that. And I really did.
That's great. Patrick, do we have questions?
Yeah, let's see here. Your readers are so great, Elly. They're having a jolly old time chatting on the comments themselves. I've been enjoying reading their comments. Let's see, for actual questions, anything going on with TV or movie land at the moment?
Oh, well, that's great. I'm glad somebody asked that, because it's something I always forget to talk about, really. So there is a little, the books have been optioned for TV a few times and nothing's happened with them. And I think that's quite standard in a way. And at first, of course, I was terribly excited and thought, wow, what should I wear for the premiere? And now I just think, oh, okay, maybe that will happen. I don't get too excited. But there has been a bit of fresh interest from a TV company, which looks promising. So they've maybe come a tiny bit closer to being on television. And I know that I always love having chats with readers about who should play which of the characters, because that's always something that can go on and on.
Are they more interested in the two standalones, or in Ruth, or in the Brighton books?
The interest has always been in the Ruth books, but actually there's been quite a lot of interest in the Postscript Murders, which has really interested me. And I think it's partly because I think Harbinder would be a good role. In fact, there's a British actress called Mandeep Gill, who I think would be brilliant personally as Harbinder, but also because there's a cast of characters that really has a big span of age, that they're sort of from sort of, 30s, 40s, 50s, characters in their 80s and 90s. So I think people have liked that. That would be great if that made it on television. So far, the Brighton mysteries, I think, are very filmic, but no one has yet really been interested in those. It's always been Ruth and now the Postscript Murders.
Okay.
Andrea has a question. She says, Elly, are you anything like Ruth?
Oh, hi, Andrea. Do you know, I don't really think I am very like Ruth, but not in the big ways anyhow. And I think one of the things that I learned quite early on as a writer was to make your character a little bit like you in the small ways. So like me, Ruth is a big Bruce Springsteen fan. Like me, she likes cats, those things, then you don't have to make up. But actually, I think as a person, we're not that alike. Ruth is quite reserved and I'm not. I think I'm much more sociable than her. Ruth, when she gets an invitation to a party, her first thought is, how can I get out of this? And my thought was always, yay, how long can I stay? That's fantastic. And then whenever I type, and I quite often type the words, Ruth said nothing, I always think, wow, I love that. But if somebody were writing my life story, they would rarely write Elly said nothing, and Ruth's an archaeologist and I'm not, Ruth's an atheist and I'm not. So actually, I don't think she is very like me, apart from Bruce Springsteen and the cats, really.
Let's see here. Yeah, Kathy Boone Reel.
Oh, hi, Kathy. She's a good friend. Hi, Kathy.
Yeah, she's made all kinds of great comments in here. And one of them is, can you bring Michelle to America, please?
Now, the thing is, Kathy is a lovely person, but she has rather murderous thoughts about Michelle, who's Nelson's wife. And I remember once we were at Bouchercon at a sort of drinks thing, and I was just about to drink a nice cocktail when Kathy appeared next to me and said into my ear, there's always poison. So, Kathy, I think Michelle would probably be a bit scared to go to America, the way things are at the moment. But I think, anyhow, I'm not going to say very much, but there's certainly more in store for Michelle in the books coming up.
Excellent. Glad to hear it.
Let's see. Sorry, they keep moving and I keep losing them. Lynn says, I want to know if Katie will realize, and I hope this isn't a spoiler to anybody, that she is the product of her parents' affair, and what will that be like?
Oh, I wonder if that's my good friend Lynn Sparl, who is been a is a good friend and a great supporter of the books. Yeah, I think the great thing in a way about having a character, having, as Barbara and I were talking about, having the characters age in real time, is of course the children grow up. And as the children grow up, at each stage, there's a new question they are going to ask, isn't there? And a new answer the adults are going to give. So I think as Kate, I'm sure it is that Lynn. I tell you why, because she always calls Kate Katie, because she's on Nelson's side. Because Nelson calls her Katie and Ruth calls her Kate. So as soon as Kate grows up, I think there will be some questions she has to answer, the questions the adults in her life have to answer. And I think, being the people they are, they will be truthful with her.
By the way, there have been a couple of people, or at least one person, who's had a hard time getting into our event on Facebook. And I apologize for that. I'm not sure. Seems like a lot of you are here, so I'm not sure exactly what the issue is, but I'll double check this. But this conversation will be available in its entirety afterwards. So I just wanted to let y'all know that. Fiona has a great question. She says, or a comment. She says, I think that there should be chalk tunnel tours here in Norwich, and that Dom/Elly should give a talk. Have you ever done anything like that?
Oh, wouldn't that be fun? I did once. So I launched the Chalk Pit in Jarrell's, which is an independent bookshop in Norwich, who'd been huge supporters of mine. And then afterwards, we had a sort of trip to a tunnel underneath the Guildhall, which is the old prison in Norwich, and actually did a reading of the book in the tunnel, which was fantastically exciting. And there is actually a tunnel underneath Jarrell's as well. So yeah, I would totally be up for that. Wouldn't that be brilliant? Yeah, we were talking about going to sort of enclosed spaces, as long as they weren't too scary and enclosed. I'd love to do a Norwich tunnel tour, because there are all these tunnels under there. You're meant to be able to walk the length of Norwich Underground from the university, which is on the outskirts, to the Guildhall in the centre. And I'd like to give that a try.
Why are you meant to do that?
I just think it's just meant to be possible. And I think it's because there are lots of these old chalk mining tunnels there, and also famously so many churches, all of which have crypts and things. So I don't know how they all join up, but there was a famous occasion in the where a bus actually disappeared into one of these holes that suddenly appeared, and it was in 1988, I think, in Earlham Road in Norwich. A bus literally disappeared into one of these tunnels. No one hurt. I'm happy to say.
Good. So in other words, it's accidental. It's not intentional.
No, it's not necessarily intentional.
Okay. No. That was my question. I was trying to work out why there was an underground city there for a particular reason. I mean, there are a couple in the United States. So Seattle has an underground city. Oklahoma City has an entire underground city. A really good book, which I edited and published, by Mariana Evans, about a Chinese community that actually moved into the underground tunnels under Oklahoma City.
I haven't read that book, but I have read a little about that. And a lot of cities have this. Sometimes there are legends. There's a wonderful one in the Paris metro. You could get in through the metro tunnels, and there was a whole community there living under Paris. And when the police finally broke into this community, they'd all gone, and they just left a note saying, "Don't try to find us."
I love that. But I mean, the Paris catacombs, and there are catacombs in Rome. And so, I mean, there's a lot of underground life, but I was wondering if Norfolk had, because it's a medieval city.
It is. And I think that's part of it. And obviously in the Chalk Pit, I kind of go there into imagining there is an underground community there. But yes, I'll be up for those tours, definitely.
I suspect that most American cities have, during Prohibition, there was a lot of illicit activity, going on underneath the city. There certainly was here in Phoenix, and there's, I guess, in Florida and Tampa, there was a pretty elaborate setup underneath the city. Remember, Ace Atkins wrote a book about that.
Yeah, well, wow. Go down to Cornwall, where there were all kinds of smugglers, and other port cities in England had some pretty elaborate smuggler caves and
Rottingdean's actually famous for smugglers as well.
You know.
Let's see here. Oh yeah, Fiona says that there are sinkholes opening up all the time in Norwich. Yeah.
And in Florida, as we've just found out. Yep.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. Might have to go underground again.
So
Right.
how much?
I'm
Well,
sorry.
just-
Well, this is on my mind, Patrick. Tell me the name of it's the Peter James detective set in Brighton. There's a TV series that tragically.
Roy Grace.
Thank you. It only has 3 episodes called Grace. Absolutely wonderful. If you're interested in Brighton, where Elly's Brighton series is set, I'm hoping that it's COVID or something that shortened it up, and they're planning on making more of it. But there's a new one also called the Whitstable Murders, and Whitstable is a famous place for oysters. I remember eating oysters in Whitstable, but that is down on the southern coast too. So, you know, if you go to MHCTV or to BritBox or Acorn sometimes, whatever, there's a lot of really good television drama set in some of the places that are, if not what we're talking about, at least adjacent to them. And there are a lot.
I think Whitstable Murders is going to be really good. That's on the Kent coast. I've eaten oysters there too. It's a lovely place.
Yeah, I've watched 2 of them and they're fun. And of course, if you really want to, you know, look north, you can go to Vera, and you've got
Vera's wonderful.
yeah, it is. And you've got Shetland, and then there's a very good series set in Manchester, which I'm blanking out on the name of it. But anyway, the name of 2 women detectives. So, you know, you can get all around. Patrick, do you know that Christine Falls is suddenly come on to television? The John Banville writing as
Benjamin Black? No, I hadn't heard that.
Rob and I watched the first one last night, and it gets, and this is a personal prejudice, I really don't like drunks, as I just get tired of watching people, you know, not act. It's going on in Bosch too. I get really tired of people just drinking themselves into some state of paralysis when they're supposed to be doing stuff. And we're not used to people smoking that heavily anymore. And so, you know, I mean, what's his name in Christine Falls, the coroner, whose name I'm temporarily forgetting. Quirk, yeah, Quirk. In fact, it's called Quirk. That's the name of the series. He's either smoking or drinking the entire time. You virtually never see him when he doesn't either have a cigarette or a drink and all. And I want to just say, come on, you're a doctor, you know, you should know better. But of course, it's the 1950s, so we're in Dublin. So it's like Mad Men, you know, they did the same thing. Anyway, Patrick, you will love it.
That sounds great. Yeah. Let's see. Kathy says, Dom, I think I mentioned to you before about Peter May's coffee table book with photos and narrative about his Hebrides novels. How about that for the Ruth books in Norfolk?
That is a really great idea, Kathy. And there's something I've thought about, my publishers have thought about. So it might happen one day, because I'd love to do. And I think Val McDermott has done a lovely book about Scotland, actually. Some of the landscapes in her books. I would love to do that. And of course, as you travel around, you know, doing events and things, you meet people, and I've met a few wonderful sort of local photographers and things. So yeah, I'd love to do Ruth Galloway's Norfolk one day. Yeah, definitely.
There's a Rebus of Scotland.
Yeah,
Right.
Of course there is. Yeah.
Right. We still have copies at the Poison Pen, which we imported when we did a convention.
Didn't
Just
they
for
do
Ian
one?
for his 30th book in the US. Ian was so cute. He said, well, they're doing a big thing here in Scotland, he said, but then he looked at me and he said, what are we doing in the US for my 30th book? So we gathered together a whole group of people at the Arizona Biltmore, and I was able to get Orion to round up Rebus of Scotland, you know, whatever copies they had left, and buy them. So we still have a few left, and it's text about, you know, Ian talking about the Rebus books and various things, and photographs, and you know, it's a really nice thing for people who are fond of series. Elly, you should definitely think about it.
I think they did one for Anne Cleeve's Shetland books too, didn't they?
I don't know.
Kind of a limited run.
If they haven't, they should.
Yeah.
Or Vera. I mean, there's some fabulous stuff up there in Northumberland and Newcastle. I mean, one of the reasons to watch Vera is for the scenery.
Yeah.
It's more, especially when she's out in the country, much more than in the city. There's some terrific photography. That was also true of Peter Robinson's series, you know, that was on with Inspector Banks. That was
definitely. Yeah.
I mean, the scenery was absolutely wonderful. So, very good reason to watch.
Definitely should do it.
Yep. Anything else, dear?
I think that's about it. Yeah, that's
All
about
right.
it. Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that everybody who did join us was able to join us. I hope you had a good time. Patrick is right that this video will live forever on our Facebook page, so you can find your way to it. It'll also be a podcast tomorrow for those who would rather listen than view. And there's an earlier one. Elly, when did we do it? About the Postscript Murders. Wasn't that long ago?
It wasn't that long ago, no. But might it have been March?
March.
Yeah, I'm thinking
Yeah.
it was in the spring. But anyway, if you go to our
Yes.
Facebook video page, you can just scroll down and you will find Elly and Patrick and me talking about the Postscript Murders, which was a lot of fun. That's one of the miracles of Zoom, is that we get to have these conversations that would have been much more difficult to stage before Zoom. And we're constantly being asked if we're going to continue to do them. And the answer is yes. We're going to be doing live events at the Poison Pen. We're going back to them on actually July 6th, and then in August, and quite a few coming up in September, unless COVID derails us in some form. But we're going to keep the Zoom events too. So it gives us a chance.
I think it's brilliant to do both, isn't it? You know,
Yeah.
I can't wait to the day I can come into Poison Pen in person. But actually, there's something so wonderful about the fact that I could be in my shed here in Brighton chatting to you, and Kathy and Lynn and other friends can be talking too. So, you know, there is something very magical about it. So thank you.
Very, very nice. And we actually, we videoed all of our live events onto Facebook for decades, at least 2 decades. So we'll continue to have that online presence even for the live events. And then we'll have some that are just strictly Zoom, depending on the location of the author, or putting together people that would be extremely difficult to coordinate, having them appear together or in groups live at the bookstore. So, you know, it's a wonderful tool. That's one of the few benefits of the pandemic, is that the technology has allowed us to do things that really are going to be great for the future. Got us through lockdowns, but are going to be excellent going forward. Anyway, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your evening if you're in the UK, or the rest of your day here in the United States. We really appreciate it. Elly, it was lovely to see you. And Patrick,
Lovely to see you.
Coffee. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you.
See you soon.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.